The snow came down soft as ash, drifting over the iron bones of the railway station until the tracks vanished beneath it. A wind curled through the emptiness like something searching for her name, brushing against the face of a woman who did not cry, not anymore. She stood still beneath the warped wooden overhang, her arms folded tight across her chest, her frame trembling less from the cold than from what had just happened. The train was gone. So was her future. She'd stepped off in good faith. The letter had promised a new beginning, a man of means, a family who'd welcome her. But the mother had taken one look at her worn shawl, at the dark smudge of soot on her cheek, at the grief that clung to her like wet cloth, and said one word, no. Then turned and boarded again. The fiancé hadn't even met her eyes. He just tipped his hat, mouthed sorry, and followed. Now all that was left was the swirl of white and the fading hoof prints of the station horses disappearing into the mist. "Reckon you'll want to move on," came a voice behind her. Hazel didn't turn. The station master Eli Tamer wasn't unkind. But pity was a knife she could feel twist with every syllable. His heavy boots thudded down the planks as he stepped closer, chewing a toothpick. "Ain't much here but wind and regret, miss. Next train don't come till spring thaw." Still she didn't move. Her grip around her thin shawl tightened. "She said you bring bad luck," he continued, quieter now. "Talked about your brother." The mind collapse. Hazel's throat ached, but her voice didn't come. She couldn't afford speech. Not here. Not anymore. Eli sighed. "You'll catch your death standin' in this. I can maybe send word to the church in Millgrove. They take in women sometimes." A gust ripped past, flinging snow into her skirt like claws. Hazel closed her eyes. That was when she heard the hooves. Slow. Heavy. Like the earth itself was moving. She opened her eyes just as the wind parted the white veil, revealing him. He rode without urgency, as if storms didn't bother him. No coat. Just a wool duster flung back in a body that looked carved from the very cliffs above them, broad shoulders, bare chest streaked with snowmelt, dark hair pulled beneath a slouched hat. His horse was just as silent, nostrils steaming, hooves muffled by the drifts. The man dismounted without a word. Eli shifted beside her. "Sawyer Ridge," he muttered, not quite greeting nor warning. "Don't come down much." Hazel didn't breathe. Sawyer's gaze met hers. Not searching. Not pitying. Just seeing. She straightened without meaning to. He looked at Eli. "She got family?" Eli cleared his throat. "No, sir. Was due to marry a Wilkins boy. They left her." Silence stretched like a drawn rope. Hazel heard her own heartbeat. Sawyer turned to her. Took one step forward. Snow crunched. "You're comin' with me." She flinched. Not at the words, but at how quietly they were said. Not a command. A lifeline tossed gently. Eli barked a nervous laugh. "Now wait a second, Ridge ain't proper to." Sawyer looked at him once. Just once. Eli fell silent. Hazel studied the man. There were no promises in his face. No questions either. Just a kind of tired patience, like a man who'd watched too many people decide too late. She looked back toward the empty tracks. Her fingers trembled. Then she nodded. Sawyer didn't smile. He just walked to his horse and patted the saddle. Hazel followed. Eli stepped forward. "You sure? You know who she is?" Sawyer mounted. "I know enough." She placed one boot in the stirrup. He reached down and lifted her behind him like she weighed nothing. The warmth of his back hit her like a sudden fire. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. As they rode off, the snow closed behind them, and the town swallowed its words. The trail was narrow and vanished often beneath drifts. Pine trees bowed heavy with frost, branches groaning like they were tired of bearing weight. Hazel's hands gripped the saddle horn, the world rocked slowly with the horse's steps, and the storm numbed what pain still hummed in her bones. Sawyer didn't speak. He didn't explain where he was taking her or why. And somehow, she was grateful for that. The quiet was thicker the higher they climbed. Somewhere in the hush of falling snow and horse breath, she let her head lean against his shoulder. Just a moment. Just long enough to feel not entirely alone. The cabin emerged like a secret log stacked strong against the mountain wind, a thin trail of smoke curling from the chimney, golden light flickering behind a thick curtain. He dismounted, then turned and lifted her down. His hands were calloused, warm, and didn't linger. Go inside. I'll tend the horse. Hazel hesitated. Then stepped to the door. It creaked as it opened. Heat hit her like a welcome. She crossed the threshold and stood still. The inside smelled of cedar, stew, and pipe smoke. A fire crackled. A table sat with 2 chairs. 1 plate. A small wooden carving rested on the mantel of a doe curled beside her fawn. She didn't touch anything. Behind her, boots stamped on the porch. Sawyer entered, shaking snow from his hat. He closed the door, peeled off his duster, and set a pot over the fire. You're welcome to eat, he said. And stay. Hazel looked at him. Why? He stirred the pot. Because you were left. She swallowed. That's not much of a reason. He shrugged. It's enough. They ate in silence. The stew was thick with root vegetables and rabbit. Her hands trembled too much to hold the spoon steady. He noticed but didn't comment. When she finished, she murmured, "Thank you." Sawyer nodded once. You can sleep in the loft. He climbed a short ladder to toss down a blanket and motioned toward it. She ascended slowly, every rung feeling like a test. When she lay down on the rough straw and wrapped herself in warmth, she watched him settle by the hearth, back turned to her, rifle within reach. Outside, the wind howled like a widow's cry. She didn't know this man. Didn't know where her life was going. But the fire was warm, the roof held, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes. That night, sleep came not as surrender but as permission. The storm raged on. But in the hush between the gusts, Hazel thought she heard it, his voice again, quiet and strange, echoing in her bones. You're coming with me. And this time, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt chosen. The morning broke pale and slow, a soft blue light filtering through the frost-fogged windows. Hazel lay still in the loft, her breath rising like smoke into the rafters. Beneath her, the fire snapped and muttered, and she could smell something rich in the air, coffee and meat, maybe. She listened to the sound of the man moving below, the careful placement of tin pans, the solid rhythm of boots on wooden planks, the occasional crackle of the stove door opening and shutting. She'd dreamt of horses and train smoke. And voices. Laughter she hadn't heard in years. But now, it was just the hush of mountain snow and the quiet man who'd brought her here. Hazel crept to the edge of the loft and peeked down. Sawyer stood bare-chested again, despite the cold, the morning fire casting amber light across his back. Scars slanted across his shoulder blades like faded claw marks. He moved with the ease of someone who'd lived alone too long to hurry. He didn't speak when he noticed her watching. Just nodded toward the table. She climbed down the ladder slowly, her muscles stiff, her fingers raw from the cold she'd carried inside her skin too long. 2 mugs of coffee steamed between them. He slid one across. She murmured a soft thank you. Storm's lifting, he said, eyes fixed out the window. Might get sun today. Hazel nodded. That's good. They sipped in silence. Steam curled around her face, thawing the hurt behind her eyes. You ever lived out here? He asked. No. Ever worked a ranch? She shook her head. He grunted. Plenty to learn then. Hazel's lip twitched. You planning to keep me busy? I don't keep anyone. But the barn roof needs mending. That made her smile, just barely. Not because of the words, but because of how gently he said them. No demand. Just an invitation to do something that might matter. They stepped outside together. The world was white and blinding, snow piled thick and soft over every fence and furrow. Pines loomed tall around the clearing, their branches bowed with the weight of winter. Hazel wrapped herself tighter in the borrowed coat and followed him toward the barn. Inside, the horses snorted in recognition. A buckskin mare leaned her great head over the stall rail, and Hazel instinctively reached up to stroke her nose. The mare didn't shy. Sawyer noticed. "She likes you." Hazel's voice was quiet. "Animals don't listen to gossip." He didn't reply. Just handed her a short axe and pointed to a woodpile by the side. "Kindlings low." She stared at the tool for a second. Her hands were not used to labor. But she took it, rolled up her sleeves, and knelt beside the logs. It was clumsy work at first. Her swing was crooked. She pinched her palm. But she didn't stop. Sawyer worked nearby, repairing a broken hinge, occasionally glancing her way. When she finally managed to split a log clean through, he offered a slight nod, small, but it warmed her more than the fire had. They spent most of the day that way side by side, speaking little, the sound of tasks replacing the noise of memory. By afternoon, her arms ached. Her cheeks were raw from wind. But she felt steadier. As if each movement laid a brick inside her she hadn't known was missing. Back in the cabin, she washed her hands in a tin basin. Blood from a splinter ran down her wrist. Sawyer caught it before she noticed. "Let me," he said. She sat at the table. He took her hand, rough fingers tracing the wound. He cleaned it with snowmelt and wrapped it in cloth. He was careful, silent, his touch unflinching but not unkind. She studied his face while he worked. He was not handsome in the polished way of town men. His nose was slightly crooked. One brow had a faint scar above it. But he wore his face the way the land wore snow, quiet, vast, honest. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked up, held her gaze a moment longer than before, then nodded and stood. That evening, Mrs. Cray came with a basket of dried herbs and flour. She didn't knock, just let herself in the way country people did when winter made hospitality law. Hazel tensed the moment she saw her. "Well," the woman said, blinking at the girl by the fire, "didn't expect to see you here." Hazel stood. "I didn't expect to be." Mrs. Cray offered a polite, brittle smile. "I suppose the hills suit some folk better than town." Sawyer walked in behind her from the shed, his presence filling the room like thunderclouds. "She's helping me through winter." Mrs. Cray glanced between them. "Helping, is she?" Hazel's fists clenched. She wanted to speak. To defend herself. To say she hadn't asked to be saved. That she'd been left like spoiled bread and had taken the only hand that didn't flinch to touch her. But Sawyer reached out and touched the back of her arm. Just a brush. It was enough. Mrs. Cray left after a cup of tea. She didn't say anything cruel. But her silence had sharp teeth. After the door closed, Hazel stared at the floor. "They'll talk." "They already are," Sawyer replied. "Why'd you bring me here?" Her voice cracked before she could swallow it. "I don't even know if you believe what they say." He stirred the fire. "I know it doesn't matter." She frowned. "What doesn't?" "Truth. Gossip. Sometimes they sound the same to folks who ain't looking close." She studied him. "And you?" "I don't need to look close. I heard how you stood. Back straight. Quiet. People who lie don't stand like that." For a long moment, the only sound was fire. Then Hazel said softly, "I was supposed to marry into something safe. Something with fences. I thought if I stayed quiet, someone might think I was worth keeping." She didn't mean to say it. But it came out like a breath she'd been holding for years. Sawyer looked at her, not with sympathy but with understanding. "You're not a thing to be kept," he said. "You're someone who stays when she chooses." Later that night, after stew and silence, Hazel climbed the ladder to the loft again. But she paused at the top rung. "Why don't you wear a shirt?" she asked, a smile almost teasing. He looked up from his fire. Too many years in heat and cold. Skin don't much care anymore. She smiled. It suits you. He lifted one brow. That a compliment? Maybe. He shook his head faintly, smirking as he tossed another log into the flames. She watched him a moment longer. Then lay down. And though the wind blew fierce against the cabin walls, and shadows danced over the beams, she slept with a steadiness she hadn't known since she was a girl in her father's orchard, when the world still held sweetness. Below, the fire burned low not for warmth, but for something else. A promise. Unspoken, but glowing. The days passed not with fanfare but with rhythm, chopping wood, feeding horses, mending fences. The snow softened slightly beneath the late winter sun, but the wind still carried a knife's edge, and the nights remained long enough to swallow hours whole. Hazel moved through them like someone half-remembered by the world, her hands slowly growing calluses, her voice finding strength in silence rather than words. She didn't ask to stay, and Sawyer never asked her to leave. It was a quiet agreement carved from shared solitude. On the third morning, Hazel found a seedling box placed by the window. Inside were pale shoots trying to reach the light, their roots clinging to soil like frightened hands. She knelt beside it, her breath fogging the glass. These yours? Sawyer glanced up from sharpening a blade. No. They're theirs. He nodded toward the pines outside. They dropped them. I keep what lives. She brushed a fingertip over a leaf. You think they'll grow? In time. That afternoon, they worked on the barn's east side where the wind had ripped shingles loose. Hazel steadied the ladder as Sawyer climbed, hammer in hand. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, listless. She watched him balance high against the gray sky, shirtless still, though a faded bandana was tied around his neck. He worked like the cold didn't touch him. Doesn't it ever get to you? She called up. The cold? No, being alone. He didn't answer right away. Just hammered one last nail and descended, boots crunching down each rung slow and steady. It used to, he said. Then it didn't. Then it did again. They stood together in silence, breath ghosting between them. I still forget how to talk to people sometimes, Hazel said, eyes on the horizon. Like I'm behind glass. Sawyer handed her the hammer. You don't have to talk to be understood. That night, the moon rose full and white, casting a cold glow across the trees and snow. They ate quietly, side by side, spoons scraping the last of the stew. The fire danced low, shadows rippling against the cabin walls. Hazel leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting to the window. The sky beyond was so clear she could almost see the stars breathing. She spoke without thinking. He died under the mountain. Sawyer looked over. My brother. The mine collapsed. He was only 19. And they said I brought it, my being near, my voice, my prayers. They said women bring bad luck to hard places. Sawyer's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Hazel continued, her voice like cloth unraveling. They whispered it to the fiancé. His mother. Even the preacher. I begged. I told them I lit a candle every day. But all they saw was a shadow. She looked at her hands. So I stopped lighting candles. I stopped praying. If they thought I carried death, maybe I did. Sawyer stirred the fire. Sparks rose. His voice, when it came, was low. My folks were killed by raiders when I was 10. I ran until the Cheyenne found me. Raised me like one of theirs. Called me Ridgewalker. Hazel turned. You never went back? No one left to go to. And the land here, he gestured toward the pines, it knew how to hold quiet. She blinked. That what you were doing when you found me? Holding quiet? No. I was listening. She swallowed, throat tight. To what? To something that sounded like you. A log shifted in the fire. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. Outside, the moon watched them, two scarred souls seated close, not yet touching, yet drawn together by the gravity of grief and gentle things. A day later, Hazel rose before the sun. She wrapped herself in Sawyer's coat and stepped into the dawn. Mist still hovered, and frost laced the pines like lacework. She reached the barn, intending to check on the horses, but froze at the threshold. Sawyer was inside, seated on a low stool, humming a low melody. One of the mares was giving birth, her flanks slick with effort. Sawyer worked calmly, hands bloodied, voice soothing. Hazel didn't speak. Just watched as the foal emerged into the world, wet, trembling, breathing. Life born into winter. When it was done, Sawyer looked up and saw her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I wanted to help." "You did." He gestured to the stall. "She knew you were near. She waited for you." Hazel stepped in slowly, crouched beside him. The foal blinked at her. Her hand reached out, touched its neck. A warmth surged in her chest, foreign and bright. Later, as they walked back to the house, Hazel said, "Do you think things break just so something else can be born?" Sawyer didn't reply right away. "Then, only when we let them." She looked up at him. "And if we don't?" "They stay broken." In the cabin that night, Hazel brought out the carving from the mantel, the one of the doe and fawn. She turned it over in her hands. "Did you make this?" Sawyer nodded. "Long time ago." "It's beautiful." "I was angry when I carved it. Thought I was making something hard." She smiled. "You made something tender." He didn't argue. She set it back down and stood beside him. Her shoulder brushed his. They didn't kiss. Didn't speak. But the firelight wrapped around them like arms. Later, as she drifted off in the loft, Hazel whispered toward the roof beams, "You never asked me to stay." Sawyer's voice rose from below, steady and sure. "I didn't have to." The moon slipped deeper into the sky, and the stars hummed. Outside, the pine trees held their breath. And inside the cabin, healing took root, not loud, not sudden, but slow and certain, like the first green shoot beneath thawing snow. The knock came just after dawn, sharp and sudden, splitting the hush like a gunshot. Hazel froze where she stood beside the hearth, her hands dusted with flour, a fresh loaf rising near the oven's mouth. Sawyer, across the room, looked up from oiling his rifle, eyes narrowing. "No one ever knocked up here." For a moment, neither moved. The knock came again, firmer now, insistent. Hazel wiped her palms on her apron, her chest tight, and nodded silently. Sawyer stood, crossed to the door, and opened it just enough for his shadow to fill the gap. Outside stood Deputy Jeb Hook, wrapped in a gray duster stiff with frost. Behind him, Mrs. Cray's shape emerged from the mist, and to Hazel's dismay, Eli Tamer followed, a folded letter clutched in his gloved hand. "Mornin', Ridge," Jeb said, adjusting his hat. "Mind if we step in?" Sawyer didn't move from the threshold. "What's this about?" Eli stepped forward. "We've come about the girl." Hazel flinched. It had been weeks since anyone had called her that. "She's not a girl," Sawyer said. "She's a woman. With a name." Jeb exhaled. "A woman, then." "Hazel Bell. Folks in town ve been talkin' dot." "That ain't new," Sawyer said flatly. Mrs. Cray's lips tightened. "She was left, Sawyer." "That's no sin." "But people remember the mine collapse, the broken engagement. They say she was taken in too fast. That it wasn't proper." Hazel stepped into view. "I wasn't taken. I came." Three faces turned toward her. Jeb softened a little, but Eli looked uncomfortable, as if seeing her broke some unspoken code of distance. "The preacher sent this," Eli said, lifting the paper. "Says he's concerned for your soul, Miss Bell. Wants you brought into the parsonage until spring. Says this situation could sour the whole settlement." Hazel stared at the letter but didn't take it. Mrs. Cray added, "No one's accusing you of anything, dear. But appearances, well, they matter. A woman alone with a man." "I'm not alone," Hazel said, voice quiet but firm. I chose to stay. Sawyer didn't look at her, but his jaw unclenched. Jeb cleared his throat. Hazel, we ain't here to drag you nowhere. Just to offer a way back. In case you felt cornered. Hazel stepped closer. I felt cornered at the station. And before that. And every Sunday I sat in a pew while folks whispered about my family like grief was contagious. Jeb lowered his gaze. Hazel turned to Mrs. Cray. Do you remember me in your kitchen? Helping your daughter sew her wedding dress? You told me I had gentle hands. And now you bring a preacher's letter instead of bread. Mrs. Cray flinched, eyes wet. Hazel's voice dropped. I'm not afraid of gossip. Not anymore. Because I've learned that the truth doesn't need defending, it just needs time. Sawyer stepped forward now, his voice like low thunder. She stays. If she wants. You can tell the preacher the mountains don't answer to men with pens. There was a pause. Then Jeb nodded, touched his hat, and turned. Mrs. Cray followed, silent. Eli hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but left without a word. When the door closed, the silence was heavier than before. Hazel stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving. I didn't mean to say so much. Sawyer placed his rifle aside. You didn't say too much. You said enough. She looked at him. They'll talk louder now. He crossed to her, slow, certain. Let 'em. The wind carries their words. This place keeps ours. She studied him, eyes shining with something unspoken. You've never asked me why I stayed. I figured I'd know when you were ready. She stepped closer. It wasn't just the snow. Or the safety. His brow lifted. It was the way you hand me tools without explaining them. The way you listen to silence like it has a voice. And how you never once looked at me like something broken. Sawyer's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. You're not broken. Just someone who lived through too much alone. She reached for his hand. Took it. Held it like a fragile thing that could shatter or bloom. Do you still want me here? His fingers wrapped around hers. I never wanted you anywhere else. The oven pinged. The bread had risen. She turned away, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her dress, laughing softly. The loaf's going to burn. That'd be a shame, he said, smiling now, a real smile, rare as a spring thaw. They sat down to eat together, bread warm, hands close, the sun finally finding its way through the cabin's frost-laced window. Outside, the world remained unchanged. But inside, something small and defiant had rooted. As dusk approached, Sawyer handed her a carving knife. For later, he said. In case we want to shape something new. Hazel looked at the blade, then at the man who had never claimed her but always made space for her. She took the knife, turned it in her palm, and smiled. They carved long into the evening, with shavings curling onto the floor like whispers, while the fire danced quietly nearby. Above them, the sky darkened to velvet, stars flickering awake. The gossip would return. So would doubt. But now, she had something steadier than the past, a man who asked nothing and offered everything. And soon, there would be something else, a moment neither of them expected, knocking not at the door, but inside their ribs. But for now, they carved. And the silence held like a blessing. The sky collapsed without warning. One moment, Hazel was mending a tear in the curtains, the next, the wind slammed against the cabin walls like a beast returned from exile. The fire guttered. The windows trembled. Snow swept sideways across the panes, thick as smoke, swallowing the world in white. She stood and pressed her palm to the glass. The pines had vanished. Even the barn faded into nothing but shadow. Then she realized something else. Sawyer was gone. He'd said he was checking the east fence. Said he'd be back before the kettle boiled. That had been over an hour ago. Hazel's breath caught in her throat. She turned from the window, heart beginning to race. The wind howled louder now, like it knew her name. She threw on Sawyer's coat, still warm from his shoulders, and grabbed the rifle from beside the hearth. Her hands shook as she checked it, then stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a slap, stinging every inch of skin. Snow piled against her knees, drifts shifting underfoot like moving sand. She shouted his name, but the wind tore the sound away before it reached the trees. Sawyer! No answer. Her boots sank deeper with each step as she pushed past the barn, into the open stretch toward the ridge. The world was nothing but blinding white and her own thudding pulse. Branches snapped somewhere ahead, too loud to be just wind. Then she saw the drag marks. Blood streaked the snow in thin lines, leading into the treeline. Her breath hitched. She followed. 15 steps in, she found him. Sawyer was half buried beneath a felled pine, one leg pinned, blood darkening the snow around him. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes dull with pain. I told that fence to wait till spring, he rasped, voice a broken chuckle. Hazel dropped to her knees beside him, snow soaking through her dress. Why didn't you call for me? He tried to smile. Didn't want you in this. You don't get to decide that. She gripped the edge of the tree, braced her feet, and pulled. It didn't budge. Hazel wiped the snow from his brow. I'm not leaving you. Hazel. No. You found me at the station. You pulled me out of silence. I'm not about to let the storm take you back. Her hands bled from the frozen bark as she dug around the trunk, loosening snow and ice. Each breath burned. She found a long branch, wedged it under the trunk, and threw her weight against it. It moved, barely. Sawyer groaned. Again. She shoved harder, screaming with the effort. The tree shifted, enough for him to slide free. He cried out as she dragged him, arms slung over her shoulders. The snow was relentless, rising, biting. But Hazel kept going. Step by step. Breath by breath. His weight was enormous, but so was the promise she carried, unspoken and steady. They reached the cabin just as the light began to fail. She kicked the door open, half-dragged him inside, collapsed beside him on the floor. Fire, he mumbled. She stoked it until flames rose, then pulled off his boots, peeled his soaked clothes, and wrapped him in woolen heat. His leg was swelling, already turning purple. You stubborn man, she whispered, hands trembling as she pressed a cloth to the wound. He caught her wrist. I would have come back. I know. But I didn't want to wait again. Not this time. He held her hand, fingers weak but sure. The night roared outside, but the cabin held. Later, he drifted in and out of sleep while she watched over him. The storm finally began to quiet. The logs in the fire hissed gently. When he woke again, dawn was curling through the frosted glass, soft gold on every wooden beam. You're still here, he murmured. I'll always be, she said. He turned his head toward her. I wanted to ask you something, but I kept waiting for the right day. Hazel smiled. The storm didn't think we needed one. Sawyer reached into the blanket's fold and pulled something from beneath the cot, a small carved band of wood, smooth and warm from his skin. He held it out to her. No preacher. No crowd. Just me. Just you. You don't have to wear it. Just say yes. She took it in her hand, tears falling silently. Yes. He exhaled, something heavy leaving his chest. She slid the band onto her finger, the grain of it warm, alive. They lay together, shoulder to shoulder, not lovers yet, but something more sacred than that. Survivors. Witnesses. People who had looked at a world that tried to bury them and said, not today. Outside, the snow began to melt beneath the first honest sun of spring. And deep in the pines, something bloomed.